everything we do is spiritual. Everything that we are is spiritual. A spiritual practice is not something that is separate from our lives. I mean, how could it be? We do have traditions of spiritual or religious practices that involve ritualistic behaviors. Maybe it's doing something, or it's saying something, or it's wearing something, or it's being at a certain place at a certain time, or doing things on a certain day in a certain way. And that's all fine. But those are all reminders. Those are all signs that point us back to remembering that everything we do is spiritual. Everything that we are is spiritual. So really, in order to live a spiritual life, you don't have to do anything outside of your life. All you need to do is remember and be aware of the sacredness of life. And maybe the challenge of modern man is not to ritualize his way into spirituality, but to actually uncover the innate spirituality that is in all things by reducing the amount of ritual behavior to clear away. Because when we clear away all of the beliefs about what makes us spiritual, all of the beliefs about what we're required to do to be spiritual, what we're left with is the same spirituality that we had as a baby, where the world was full of wonder, and we truly were these free spiritual beings. We were just free to express, free to be, without all of the clutter, I think, that a lot of us gather over our lives, whether it's coming from other people or other places or other sources. So just keeping in mind that all we have to do is be present and give our life our attention, and we'll realize that everything we do is sacred, everything we do is spiritual. Spirituality is the conscious act of deepening one's life experience. It's the study and practice of sensing, becoming more aware of, and appreciating the universal power and beauty that is inherent in all things.
Welcome to this episode of Evolve, an exploration of spirituality, wellness, and the thoughtfulness practice with acclaimed author and visionary teacher, Kalani Das.
The root of the word inspire means to breathe in. When we think about inspiration, we think about energy, movement, and action, a sort of aliveness. Spirituality can be thought of as the practice of sensing and experiencing that universal energy that's at the core of all movement. Spirit is what is responsible for the animation of all things. Spirituality is the experience of connection to that energy or force. When we describe someone who is spirited, we're usually talking about someone who is animated, elevated, and some might put it operating on a higher frequency. Conversely, someone who is low in spirits is often described as down, slow, sluggish, and lacking energy. Spirit is what moves us. Spiritual practices vary greatly from culture to culture, community to community, and from person to person. It's true that while we might discuss spiritual practices with each other, Each of us has a unique spiritual experience that is our own and no one else's. You cannot live someone else's spiritual practice, nor can someone else live yours. It's up to you to develop your own spiritual practice and to allow others to develop theirs. Looking to the world of man, and also back into time and the history of man, it's very easy to see that differences in concepts of what a spiritual practice could or should be have caused a great degree of conflict and suffering. The definition of tension is the effect of two forces moving in opposite directions to one another. With this in mind, if our goal is to reduce tensions that could be caused around spiritual practices, then our mission could be to find areas of mutual agreement and benefit. This brings us to the questions: 1, what are my personal spiritual goals? And 2, how can I serve the greater community through my spiritual practice? What are my personal spiritual goals? Many people seek to find a sense of connection in their spiritual practice. If this is one of your goals, then you want to make time to cultivate feelings of oneness and the sensations of aliveness that are intrinsic in your being. Every plant and animal, and some might also include earth elements, has within it the capacity for receiving and expressing universal energy. We all are conduits for the flow of spirit that runs through all things. This flow is not a choice, it is simply a matter of fact. As an animal, or what you could call an animated form, your nature is to embody spirit. As a human, your greatest challenge is to allow your mind to present you with its myriad thoughts without allowing those thoughts to blur or diminish your sense of spiritual connection to all that is. Another common spiritual goal relates to experiencing peace and contentment. The shortest pathway to peace is to connect with the sensation of space and the stillness that lies at the core of all being. There is no movement without stillness. We can connect with peace and contentment by observing those peaceful beings around us. Some find this peace in nature, for example, observing the elegant and simple beauty of a tree or flower. All life is equally supported in a very peaceful process. Although we might struggle with the idea of birth, growth, decay, and death, when we step back far enough to look beyond our own life, we see an ongoing cycle of formation and dissolution, all stemming from the same source, in our case, the earth. It gives some people a great sense of comfort and peace to know that they are born of the earth, supported by the earth throughout their life, and held in her arms upon their return. Many people turn to a spiritual practice to experience joy and love. One needs only to focus his attention on the spirit of children to observe the natural state of human beingness. The buoyancy, resiliency, and fearlessness experienced by the youngest members of our community can serve as a model for us all and remind us of our true nature. Many people experience this kind of creative play through the expressive arts, drawing, sculpture, music, and dance. Others experience it through recreational arts, such as indoor and outdoor sports. Still others find creative play through the domestic arts, such as cooking or craft making. One might say that all art is simply an outward expression of the internal spiritual experience. Art making often facilitates feelings of connection to the source of one's spirituality. As humans, we're aesthetic creatures. We are the only animals who create art. It's through this experience of play and expression that we can come to know ourselves and find our place in this world. How can I serve the greater community through my spiritual practice? History shows us that attempts to formalize a spiritual practice to the point where it is universally accepted by everyone in a society have largely failed and even caused great suffering as groups of people debate over which practices are the best. Because so much about any spiritual practice is subjective and personal to the individual, it would appear that spending great amounts of time and energy trying to convince others to adopt one's own spiritual practice might not be the best use of that time or energy. Certainly, individuals who find a practice that seems to work well for them are excited to share it with others. But given the fact that over thousands of years, humans have developed a multitude of spiritual practices, perhaps the best approach for supporting the greater spiritual community would be to focus on areas of commonality, where people with differing views can still support one another. In this way, people whose goals are to increase the sense of connectedness and unity between themselves and others, to find and embody the nature of peace and contentment that are inherent in all things, and to cultivate feelings of love and joy that are a natural part of every person, can, by focusing on these qualities, reduce tensions between peoples and elevate the spirituality of the global community as a whole. We can each do this through our individual actions. We can each develop a personal practice that is meaningful while allowing others to do the same. What effect would it have on the degree of tension we now experience between varying cultures if individuals were to become more tolerant and accepting and even supportive of other people's spiritual practices. How would it change things if people stopped focusing on trying to convince other people to believe what they believe and instead focused on cultivating their own spirituality instead? Gandhi is famous for having said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." Clearly, he was not talking about changing other people, but about changing oneself. In order to live in a world where everyone is valued as a spiritual being, and where everyone is encouraged to live a spiritual life, each of us must come to appreciate, allow, and support the spiritual practices of our brothers and sisters, even if those practices seem to be very different from our own. Chances are, the goals are the same, even if they come wrapped in a different package. We can see from examining nature that life takes many forms, spirit flows in many directions, all things are connected at different points. Peace and stillness are inherent in all things, and all expressions of the earth are expressions of joy and the universal love that binds all things. Perhaps it's time that we focused on our similarities rather than our differences when it comes to our own spiritual practices. If you're someone who worries that your brothers and sisters in other cultures or who practice other spiritual practices are on the wrong path, rather than use your time and energy trying to change them, consider broadening your perspective to include them. Imagine that they're traveling on a path that is not far away from yours, and that the two will eventually meet just up around the corner. We could question the notion that it's necessary that we all must walk the same path. As long as everyone is reaching the goal, perhaps the best way to reduce tension is to accept what seems to be the natural course of spiritual practices, which is for individuals to find their own way, in their own way. When we realize and accept that a spiritual practice is something that is both personal and unique to each of us, we take the first steps towards creating a spiritual community that is universally supportive and nurturing for everyone. Developing a spiritual practice is a lifelong journey, but it shouldn't take a lifetime to find the path and to reap the benefits of your practice. We're all spiritual beings, and because spirit is that force that is responsible for moving everything in the universe, from solar systems to atoms, and from ocean currents to your current emotions, you're automatically connected, activated, and wired for joy and contentment. Future talks will focus on deepening an understanding of the effects of perspective and orientation as related to one's life experiences, happiness, and contentment.
You've been listening to Evolve with author and teacher Kalani Das. Visit kalanidas.com, where you'll enjoy inspirational music, insightful articles, and other resources as you continue to evolve.